All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Facebook Live session. So, we are streaming simultaneously on Facebook and YouTube, and we are recording the session. So, it's going to be available to view on both the DCAGT and the DCSD websites, as well as on the DCAGT Facebook and YouTube pages. So, I am Becca Coster, and I'm going to be your moderator this evening. Before we get started, I'm going to tell you just a little bit about DCAGT. So, it stands for the Douglas County Association for Gifted and Talented, and we are a 501c3 nonprofit. We're made up of all volunteers. We have family members, educators, and community members, and we are an affiliate of the Colorado Association for Gifted and Talented. So we provide information, we share resources, and our experience with others as to what has worked well for our gifted students. So we're here to help both those of you who have just started your journey into giftedness, as well as those who've been at it for a while. And we also talk often to families about how to advocate for their students by building strong, long-lasting relationships with teachers and gifted education facilitators. So please feel free to reach out to us if you need any assistance or would just like some people who might be understanding where you are in your journey. So in order to honor your time, it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, and that is Dr. Kate Bachtel. So, hi. So she is the founder of SoulSpark Learning, which is an innovative, research-informed educational approach. And its programming evolved from Kate's scholarship on exemplary practices for gifted youth. So she's earned a doctorate in education with an emphasis in giftedness from the University of Denver and has a master's degree from the University of Colorado at Boulder. Kate continues to teach gifted and twice exceptional children, simultaneously to coaching and collaborating with educators, with parents, and schools across the United States. So prior to that, she co-led the opening of the McIntosh Academy in Boulder, which is a K through 8th grade school for gifted youth. Kate has also served 2 terms on the board of directors for supporting the emotional needs of the gifted, the SANG organization, and she was president from 2016 to 2017. So she's going to be presenting this evening. So please welcome Dr. Bachtel. Hi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Becca. I'm so grateful to be here and part of this amazing community. I know Douglas County has really done a lot of work to provide exemplary programming for gifted youth, and especially through the partnership. I know Douglas County Schools is sponsoring and helping and getting the word out. So thank you to that team as well. And do you want to share a little bit about the question and answer session at the end, Becca?
Yes, definitely. So during the presentation, Dr. Bachtel will have a couple areas where she will ask for comments and questions. So during that time, please type your comments into the comments section below, or you can email info@dcagt.org, and I will be monitoring both the comments as well as the email address. I know some of you may not always be comfortable having your name and your question out on such a public platform. So, and anytime you have questions, just pop them in and we will get to as many questions as we can.
Thanks. And I'll have my email at the end too if you have questions or specific information you'd like follow up on afterwards too.
All right, wonderful.
So to begin, I have an image and would love if you feel comfortable you sharing your comments on how this makes you feel. I'm not seeing the comments coming through yet, and so I'm new to the Facebook live stream, so maybe they're not coming up. But in the past, when I ask this question, I kind of get conflicting things. For some people, it might make them feel really peaceful, the image. And for others, there might be a combination of feelings. They see the heart and they see that there's like kind of joy in that image of a heart in nature, and they feel a connection, right? Like a love for nature. And then others who feel pain and grief over this tree that might be hurt or injured. And the reason I started with this picture is it kind of is reflective of some of the complex emotions that we're all experiencing during COVID, during the COVID pandemic, right? There's, for some of us, feelings of grief, loss of what used to be a typical way of life, and changes in practices that we've had to adopt to better care for ourselves and our community. And also for some, and especially some of our gifted youth with sensory sensitivities, or who haven't had their needs met in the school environment for the most part. Some have felt like reprieve and sanctuary in being able to be in the comfort of their home environment. So keep that in mind as we go through today. And you're going to see a theme that kind of emerges that relates to kind of paradox. Just like in the picture, we have joy, peace, and also sadness, potentially pain and grief. And as we start, I like to remind all of us that the parenting is a science and an art, and what works for one gifted child might not for another. And over years, more than decades of facilitating parent groups, this is so completely clear, right? And also for us as parents, a practice that works for us today might not tomorrow. And I think one of something that makes me cringe sometimes is when we see these lists, these prescriptive practices. If you just do X, Y, and Z, everything will be wonderful and your child will be joyful, and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And or with all of the media that we're consuming, it's a post that says, just do, these 10 things. And oftentimes those prescriptive posts, they don't really apply to the complexities and intricacies, nuances, and development for all of our gifted children. So I really want to honor that. Parenting is just a sacred practice. And so when we're going through today, we're really looking at it in terms of that as a practice, areas that things that we might want to try and experiment with. We all have had our mistakes, and that's part of the art and science of parenting. There's always going to be things that we don't understand about our children's development, right? And that mystery is part of the wonder and joy of parenting. And so this session it's for you. It's all about you today. We're going to have a Q&A session at the end, but it'd be helpful to me if you dropped in the comments if you're comfortable sharing the grade level of your child or children, and if they're in home, hybrid, or in-person learning, and if you do have any pressing questions.
And while those are coming in, I am a parent, so my student is a 7th grader, and she is a full-time e-learner. So she's doing learning at home. And I don't know if I have any specific pressing questions. I'm really looking forward to this session because there are things that are popping up and they kind of go away and then they re-pop up and then new things come up. What works today may not work tomorrow.
Absolutely. So if those come in, I see some 9th, 12th, middle school, high school, 3rd grade. Awesome. And as more come in, certainly let me know. 3rd, 4th. So we have some upper elementary, middle, and maybe middle and high school students. Fabulous. And so something to keep in mind, I think that there is a lot as people are navigating the tensions of change that have arisen with COVID. There are a lot of heavy feelings oftentimes. And I think it helps to remember and look at the state of our students' well-being prior to COVID. In some ways, COVID has really been a gift, and that the physical distancing that we had to experience for some time reminds us of a shared human purpose of connection to each other, connection to ourselves. And then also, no matter what our profession is, and especially in schools, it reminds us to return to them and prioritize what is the true purpose of school of education, of our profession, and to prioritize those practices, those priorities. So keep in mind that prior to COVID, only 1 in 5 teens in the United States reported feeling a sense of purpose. We hypothesized for some of our gifted youth, those numbers were even lower. So think of that. Fewer than 20% perhaps of our teens felt that sense of meaning and connection, and think of how that negatively impacts mental health. And then the opportunity that COVID presents for us to really look at how we can provide more meaningful instructional practices in school. And as parents, again, what are our values and priorities for our children, and how do we align our resources and practices with those goals and priorities? Prior to COVID, there's been a steady decline in EQ skills. And we're looking specifically at psychometric assessments that measure emotional development and I specifically look at 8 skills that account for about 50% of the variance in life outcomes. And so think about that. If these EQ skills have such a big impact on things like achievement, well-being, relationship quality, self-efficacy, life satisfaction, and those skills are declining, that's obviously potentially going to impact our well-being. So COVID allows us to kind of refocus on teaching those skills. Colorado also had one of the highest youth suicide rates in the country. I know that rate had increased, I think, about 58% over the course of the last 3 or 4 years. 25 school shootings in the country in 2019. Approximately 37% of high school students reported feeling persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness. And then importantly here for our audience, countless gifted youth experiencing educational oppression, not having their academic and emotional needs being met, learning essentially in school that school was not designed for how they experience the world. And certainly, again, Douglas County has exemplary practices, and so that's not happening in Douglas County in the same rates, in the same way that it is in a lot of other parts of the country, including in states where they don't have legislation to even identify, recognize the needs of this unique population. So today we're going to look at some practices, some habits, some things that we can try as we're prioritizing well-being and achievement for our students. We'll look at the environmental considerations and care, knowing that the environment has the environments that we're a part of have a critical impact on outcomes. And then we'll look at the seasons of gifted parenting. And then this is a picture. I'm a parent as well. My students are in high school now, but this is a picture of them when they were in middle school, being a little bit silly and playful. But again, I've been a parent to 2. I've been an educator to many gifted children and supported many parents over the years. But myself, I have only parented 2 children. So keep that in mind too. Just a little bit about Soulspark Learning for your background. Rebecca shared, we're a 501c3 nonprofit, and we're dedicated to optimizing the development and well-being of youth and the educators who care for them. And so all of our programming is informed by research-informed practices, and it's informed by research with exemplary programming for K through 8 gifted youth. So we support all of these 8 aspects of development, knowing that they're all interdependent and impact each other. So intellectual development, emotional, again, we take a pretty scientific, disciplined approach to supporting it and looking at specific skills. And I'll note as we're going through, this is a topic that we're recruited to speak about quite frequently. And talking about supporting student, child, youth, our own emotional development is like a 2-hour presentation in and of itself. So this is a brief window and appetizer today. And of course, if you need more information, you can contact us. Sociopolitical development, so beyond social development, not just our ability to connect with others, but importantly, to be able to recognize and resist oppression and remedy inequities. Multicultural development, so beyond being inclusive of the range of individual identities to proactively cultivating a pluralistic, diverse society. Eco-literacy, connection with the natural world, physical development, creative, and spiritual, which we define independent of religion as really tied to purpose, where each person's unique constellation of strengths and interests connect with opportunity to shine and be of purpose. So with that in mind, when we're studying programs that support diverse K through 8 gifted youth and thriving, we see themes in the practices. things that they're doing. And so when we're looking as parents to navigate these times of tension, and where we might feel overwhelmed by the volume of advice, direction that we're getting, we oftentimes use these as a guidepost, right? So when we had families that were maybe in hybrid learning or deciding to transition to homeschool, or because maybe they were moving and to be with family, we oftentimes would refer to these practices when designing schedules too, and making sure that there's time in the day to support each. So what are those kind of 5 practices or themes that we saw that are common in exemplary programs for gifted youth? The first is that there's time for students to pursue questions of interest, things that they're passionate about, meaningful learning. So oftentimes there'll be big blocks of time for students to explore questions of interest and to be supported in the scientific process of research. So when we say passion and purpose, I think when oftentimes when we say passion, it's just letting kids do whatever they want to do. And that's not this. It's really a beautiful balance of kind of play and exploration and disciplined practice, right? No matter what we might like to do in our lives, there are skills and things that we have to practice with focus for us to be able to grow and improve. And so again, it's a balance of both. You can think of it too as making sure that there's time for flow and for students to get lost in their learning, and also times of resistance. And those are going to look different for every single student, and you know yours, right? So if you have a choice exceptional student who maybe experiences the world with dyslexia, maybe they need to have more focused practice on phonics or explicit literacy instruction. And likewise, if you're like me and you have not as well developed fine motor skills, you're practicing more, you have more time, you're practicing writing or crafting or things like that to develop those. Next, we have emotional skills. And so again, we're looking at the actual skills that impact life outcomes. And again, given the time we have here, we can't get into all of those skills in depth. But when you're thinking about COVID times, 2 skills really stand out that we can practice. The first being emotional literacy. A common thread that many gifted youth have is this depth and complexity to their emotions. And research shows us that actually only 1 in 3 adults can accurately identify their emotions as they occur. And I think sometimes it's easy to think that maybe only one emotion occurs at a time, when in reality, oftentimes we're experiencing multiple emotions simultaneously. So to the extent that we can support gifted youth and growing their emotional vocabulary so that they can express the nuance and the degrees of their emotions, that is hugely empowering. That they can describe the difference between frustration, anger, rage, etc., and then validate those emotions and help them transform the emotions and work them through in a positive way, to validate them and feel them so that they can pass through. It's so important to gifted student well-being to be validated rather than beginning the deficit messaging sometimes that they do receive in other contexts, that they're too sensitive or too intense. Another skill, emotional skill that we can work on or can be highlight during the turbulent COVID times is optimism. I'm not talking about that Pollyanna dismissing uncomfortable emotions, right? Like we want to support in feeling all of those uncomfortable emotions, but I'm talking about when challenges present, looking for the opportunities, taking a perspective of choice. And yes, I can't control what's happening to me, but I can choose how I'm responding to the choices or what I'm seeing, what I'm looking at. So if you think about maybe if you're riding a bike, it's physics, right? If you're riding a bike down the trail and there's a rock in the middle of the trail, if I'm looking at the rock, I'm going to hit the rock. I'm going to hit the obstacle. If I'm looking at the problem, oftentimes that problem, it grows and crescendos. If I'm looking at the space alongside the rock, if I turn and if I'm looking at the solutions, it's more likely that I'm going to go in the direction of the solution. So there are a number of ways that we can teach optimism, but at its heart, we're looking for choices and opportunities. And another, a simple practice to cultivate optimism as well is to have a gratitude practice at the end of the day. And we can do it at any time during the day. That's when I happen to do it, is just a practice before I go to sleep at night, to be thankful for the different people or things in my life. Agility is promoting capacity for navigating complexity. And so with that, I'm talking about physical agility, emotional agility, which we're oftentimes we're practicing emotional skills, we're learning that, and also cognitive, right? And here we'll see this, the importance of being able to embrace or to hold paradox. And oftentimes, many years ago in school, so many of the answers that the test students are taking, there's a black and white answer. And we oftentimes inadvertently teach convergent black and white thinking. And that is helpful in some situations, but being able to navigate complexity requires us to be able to oftentimes hold more, right? And to support the development of divergent thinking skills. And agility here in COVID, as there are different closures, it becomes important to have physical practices too that support the health of the physical body. And that might be through hiking, through yoga, through parkour. Parkour is actually, and we can do that outside, right, where there's less opportunity for spread. But it's fascinating to me that I've seen many gifted youth really drawn to parkour, practices that can be sustained across the lifetime. And if you think about agility too, whether it's physical, emotional, or cognitive, it's that flexibility is achieved through structured practice, right? And so there's another beautiful paradox that we see there. Agility, we can think of like as parents too, like, are we modeling that agility? Are we truly in dialogue? Are we truly listening to our children and responding to them? So with all of these things, we teach through practice. The best way to teach these practices is to model them ourselves. And that goes for creative behaviors too. Creating time, space, tools, and supplies to innovate and nurture those creative behaviors. And so as an adult, I ask, like, are we nurturing our creative selves? Are we crafting? Are we engaged in arts, any kind of musical instruments? Are we tinkering? For some of our students, I have one who likes, for him, working on cars is a creative practice, because he's always innovating, taking the tools and supplies to try and fix something that's broken. So when we talk about creative practices, we're not just talking about art. It's a pretty expansive definition. And it's really especially important to provide time and space, I'd say daily, for creative practices. Here, one, because it helps us integrate the intellect and emotions, right? When we have those big feelings, art helps us move them through and transform them into a contribution into something tangible. But we also, from a scientific standpoint, know that any kind of creative practice accelerates both psychological and physical healing. So super powerful impact on our health. And then last, environmental connections, facilitating relationships with the natural world, learning habitat, and the cultural climate. When we help create the space, we become part of it and feel more connected. And that space is at home, space is at school. And then we know that there are also health benefits of time in nature. So in the comments, if you have a moment, I want you to share one of your most powerful parenting practices, just so that we can take, if you're comfortable, so we can kind of take in the wealth of expertise here in the community. And I might not be able to see it, but as it comes up for you, go ahead and share.
All right.
And it looks like, are the slides somewhat behind, Becca, now that I see? I think what I am seeing is not what you're seeing. Okay, now I think it is catching up now. I apologize. I'm not sure what the delay is, but I think I'm seeing that now.
All right. So, yeah, I think we're let me.
think everyone can see the same right now. I don't see a dedicated alone time with each child. I see that's an excellent practice.
Yeah, and while the comments are coming in, one of the things that that I've started to do during the last years, I found that my child will tell me more of her feelings when she's moving. So if she has a lot of feelings, we'll go for a walk or we'll go for a bike ride or we'll do something. So she's moving and she doesn't have to look at me. And then we can share more that way. Oh, open-ended questions. Like, what was something nice you saw someone do today? And that was from Kim.
One that has been particularly helpful for me, especially as a parent of teens, I call it telepathic parenting. It's when I have something that I feel like I really want to coach or advice that I really want to give, but my children are clearly not in a place to listen or hear it, but I feel like the need to get it out. So I'll pretend I'm talking to them in my head. I'll give them the advice like as if I'm talking to them silently, and then it appeases my need as a parent to, to get it out. And like, believe it or not, sometimes, I mean, like, I think that silence, I feel like sometimes I like to think that they hear it just by me thinking it. That's wishful thinking, certainly. But it's been one that has been helpful because I think, as many, we want the best, and it's so easy, I think, to over verbalize and give advice where sometimes students like the challenge of being able to figure it out on their own. I see open-ended questions. If others come in, Becca, certainly let me know.
There are a couple more that came in.
Okay,
so
cool.
Jen says mental health days where we take time off of school and go do something together. And then Mary Margaret says embracing my own imperfections, admitting when I'm wrong, and letting my son know that I learn from him as much as he learns from me. The first two aren't easy.
Sharing mistakes are like, and things like where we've made mistakes, so incredibly powerful because it gives that vulnerability, gives our students permission to take risks and be courageous.
Wonderful. And then Jeanette says making suggestions and then waiting. It's so hard. It also lets them make the decision.
Mm.
And Sherry says focus on asking if any challenges with schoolwork and finding passion outside of school for artistic or athletic outlet. Dance, cheer, art, guitar, hiking.
Beautiful. So I'm hoping, I see another one for Kim.
Yeah, for Kim, she says, another good one is if you could recommend your teacher do something different next time, what would it be?
Yeah, anything where we can put empower the perspective. So just the act of soliciting input, right? Like, if you had a magic wand, what would you change if you could? Not just about like school or what happened that day or something that they might be complaining about, a coach or a teacher, but also like, at home, hey, making a regular check-in practice, what could we have done different as a family to make this, easier for us to maybe navigate the schedule of the morning or whatever it might be.
Right. Definitely. And Fiona writes, one of our major emotional parenting wins have been to sit the kids down and talk about how I feel about events or things that have happened and opening the floor for them to share things, how things have made them feel. And this seems to really open our kids up.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. And one of the things that I've started doing is because I am a person who has anxiety. So when I have a high anxiety day, I let my child know that I'm having anxiety. So if she feels anxiety, to figure out if that's hers that she's feeling or if it's mine. Like,
hugely powerful. And also, I imagine, Becky, you're so strong at that too, describing, especially when kids are younger, right? You have middle school students now, but describing what that anxiety feels like in our bodies, because sometimes young students don't even recognize it as anxiety. They just know that they feel really uncomfortable. And that can be pretty powerful too. So we're seeing like that parenting really requires us to hold a paradox, and that this is how we grow strong relationships, integrate, and work towards unity. So some of the paradox we're seeing is that we need to provide spaces for both free play and disciplined practice, that chaos and order, flexibility, instruction and in structure, and science and art. And then as I was thinking about this, I just made this, and it's not like a great graphic, right? But trying to really illustrate that all of these spaces that our children navigate in the world are connected and impact each other. And we're starting first with the sanctuary space of our hearts, like that we can find home in sanctuary no matter where we are in the world. And one way to do that from a practice standpoint is through meditation. And meditation doesn't mean necessarily sitting still and just thinking nothing. There are so many different types of meditation, guided meditations. There are all kinds of meditation apps. And if you want specific resources, certainly ask afterwards too. But walking can be meditation. Working on a car or crafting, that can be meditation. But those really can help us kind of cleanse. I meditate at the end of the day before going to bed. I think of it as like shutting down the computer that is my brain, right? It's a shutdown, powering down process that really prepares me for high quality sleep. And if you're talking about something that many youth, especially with increased screen time, and as screens might be used at night, that's a stimulant, and it can negatively impact sleep quality. And we forget how integral sleep is to overall health and well-being. Moving beyond the sanctuary of our hearts to the home space, what do we do to make our home feel like a sanctuary, right? How does this space influence our emotional weather conditions? Do you have certain smells, sounds? It was snowing tonight, so I felt inspired to light a candle. Like candles, do you use essential oils? Do they help with creating a welcoming, warm space? And if you have certain practices, certainly drop those in the comments. But having routines and rituals, things like game nights, dancing while doing the dishes, little texting practices, like making sure an "I love you" in some form or another lands on every child or children, the children that you might have every single day. We have a tradition. We have a little piece of art that hangs over our front door. It's a geometric. It's geometric art, and we will spin that piece of art as we walk out first thing in the morning and say, "With love to all and harm to none." But what rituals can you create to make the space, both from a sensory and emotional standpoint, feel like a sanctuary? Moving on from the home, we have the neighborhood and the collective. And COVID really reminded us of I think that there was this huge movement for self-care, taking care of ourselves. But self-care, if you have less access to resource and opportunity, if you're a family experiencing economic poverty, so all the self-care in the world it will help, but you need that collective. You need your neighborhood. You need community care too. You need the collective to hold you. And it's that sense of belonging that is a protective factor for our youth. There are neurobiological benefits of those feelings of connection. As we're practicing the emotional skills, it makes it easier for us to develop high quality relationships with ourselves and those in our community. And when I say neurobiological benefits, it actually it reduces our energy. The larger the size of our network of friends, family, community members, where there's established trusting relationships, the less our energetic expenditure to interact with our environment. And there's research to show that even the mere presence of a stranger, if something were to happen to you, you slip and fall, if a stranger is nearby, it increases the chance that you're able to overcome an obstacle, just the mere presence of another human being. So that neighborhood, the sense of community and belonging, can be cultivated regardless of whether we're in homeschool, hybrid learning, or in person, right? That those communities can be established at school, but also through service opportunities and in the community, finding a place to give our gifts, to share the resources that we have. And for some youth that youth that need to work, they need to support in bringing revenue to the family. So maybe it's through volunteer work, maybe it's through actual and paid employment as they get older. Might be through spiritual communities, clubs, athletic teams, advocacy groups like Douglas County Gifted and Talented, but reflecting on how am I contributing to my neighborhood? How am I creating a community that then nurtures the home and the individual, and so on. Governing bodies also influence our well-being. The political environment can influence access to human rights and opportunities. I think, like, just a practical example, I think I grew up in the Midwest and a small town in Wisconsin outside of the Milwaukee area. Milwaukee is one of the most segregated cities in the entire country. And it's honestly, it's a harder place to be a woman. It was a harder place to be a woman where I grew up than when I moved to Colorado. If you look at the local government, I think still to this day, there are no women in local government. And I think just for the first time recently, there's one woman on the school board. And when you don't see representation of voices in the governing bodies, it influences the health of those populations. And so when we're looking, that's why we want to, as employers, nonprofits, et cetera, be looking at the diversity of representation of voices and leadership roles. And it helps our gifted youth wired with social justice genes to grow awareness of where power resides and how they can work to more equitably distribute power. As adults, we can reflect on where can I step aside and create space for less heard voices. And then finally, the natural world really returns us full circle to the sanctuary of the home of our heart. What practices do we have to care for the natural world, knowing that ultimately influences our cellular function, our gene expression, our health and well-being on an integral way. And so it brings us full circle back. We are our environment. And then I know we're going pretty close on time here, but just one more thing as we're thinking of the seasons of parenting. The beautiful thing about parenting is that the measure, and the challenging thing about parenting is the measure of a strong parenting is fledgling and independence. There are seasons in the natural world, seasons of life, seasons of the day. And they talk a lot about this in Indigenous education practices. They reference the medicine wheel so frequently, right? That first in Indigenous education practices, until each person feels a sense of belonging, no instruction takes place. So first, we want to make sure every child has that sense of belonging. And then we're teaching skills. And then as students and children grow skills, then they are earning increased autonomy. And then the measure of successful parenting and successful education is generosity and giving back to our community. Some of the questions that we can ask, and we can maybe explore in the question. I'm looking, I think we're, how are we doing on time, Becca?
We're doing great.
Okay, awesome. Looking at when do we step in and when do we step away, right? Is your child in a toxic climate? Are they experiencing bullying behavior or an unhealthy relationship? That's a time when we might step in versus when have skills been introduced and they need to be practiced and maybe make some mistakes, maybe fall to kind of learn and continue to grow. And that's, again, part of the art of it. As some of you so wisely shared in the comments, like, you are scientists as parents, you're observing when and where is it easiest for your children to share and to listen. And Becca shared that expertise too. For many youth, it's easier when you're walking or side by side in parallel. So there isn't like the pressure of being looked at. but kind of making note of those spaces so that we can create them and facilitate strong dialogue and really hear what our youth have to say and encourage them also. And I said hear, but to communicate sometimes beyond verbal expression, right? A lot of students feel more comfortable sharing through their art or through visual, other communications, behavior, right? All behavior is a smoke signal. It communicates important data to us. And that the seasons of parenting include joy, pain, and all the in-betweens, and recognizing that, like, right, there are seasons of life, there are seasons of the year, and that sometimes the exposure to struggle, to adversity, it is ultimately what builds the resilience and the ability to navigate the next challenges, to climb the next mountain. And as related, as parents, we don't always think about or reflect on who is on our support team. And I think especially in times of tension, it's really important to know, like, who's in our resource directory, who can we go to ask for help, and not always to ask for help either, right? To ask for a different perspective, for someone to reflect with on different ideas, hear feedback from. And so maybe that's something that you make and keep for yourself as a visual, and to model for your children, that they can also create their support team, support crew, people that they can go to and have that as a reference and a guide. And if you have specific resources, I know that Douglas County puts out so many through to share, but if you have ones that maybe you feel like people are less aware of, certainly drop those in the comments too. And just kind of one last thing, this is from the Search Institute, and as we're thinking about relationships, these are another way to look at it, some guideposts. It's the Developmental Relationship Framework. Just very generally, when we're reflecting on our parenting practices, are we expressing care? Are we dependable? Are we available to listen? Are we expressing that we believe in our children? How are we encouraging them? Are we challenging growth? How are we ensuring that our children know that we're expecting their very best, that we have high expectations for them, and we're stretching them and encouraging them to, again, take risks and reflect on their mistakes by sharing ours. So we're expressing care, challenging growth, providing support. Are we helping students navigate when the distance between expectations and their current skill set might be too great? How are we stepping in? How are we advocating for them? Are we volunteering for Douglas County Gifted and Talented to recruit more excellent speakers to help grow expertise and the size of the community? Are we setting healthy boundaries? How do we share power with youth? Are we respecting them? How are we including them in the decision-making process? Do we sometimes let them plan family activities or outings, or let them guide guide school decision-making, whether that be in helping pick a middle school or a college? And then expanding possibilities. How are we opening them to new horizons? How are we exposing to different cultures? If we can't travel due to COVID, we can still watch documentaries from different places around the world. We can read books, right? Look at movies. How can we broaden our students' horizons, introduce them to new potential possibilities, whether it's just career or practices, things that bring them joy, and then obviously connecting with new people too. So that's a framework, and more can be found about that. Found out about the Search Institute from their website, and work to the research informing it. But it's something to reflect on as we're looking to improve our parenting practices. And then lastly, if we are looking to monitor, assess well-being, the World Health Organization has a well-being institute. There's just a 5-question survey that you can look up, and it really boils well-being down to feelings of joy and vitality. And so this is how the World Health Organization measures well-being. And so it's another guidepost, something for us to reflect on as we're looking at our children's health and our own health too. And so kind of with that, I just want to thank everyone again for this opportunity. And I think we'll move on to question and answers. I have my email there too at the bottom in the event it's helpful.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. So please type your questions in the chat or email them to info@dcagt.org. And we can go ahead and take questions. I know that might take a couple seconds. Jeanette has written that this has been a very hard time for her son as he shifts from remote and hybrid learning schedules. So, Jeanette, I read above that your students are
they're high school students. She has a senior and a sophomore. Is that right? I think. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I also, Jeanette, I also have a senior, and I think, yes, it is super hard and it is super challenging. And I think naming that is really important, right? And also naming the fact that, like, being able to navigate, think about this, being able to navigate this degree of change, how much stronger it will be. And like, if we can navigate COVID changes from in-person to remote learning in a time we haven't, we're all in the unknown, right? This is a new frontier for all of us as parents, as teachers, etc. And if we can name that and share how empowering it will be, then think if you can navigate these changes, the other changes you'll be able to navigate, in your life, right? So, and again, it's that art of both validating and looking at the opportunity in the situation. I don't know if that helps, Jeanette, but yeah, it's a struggle.
Yeah.
Definitely. And so the struggle is also holding that yoga pose where my shoulders get all tired and I start to shake. Right. But then when I do it, like on a micro level, the next time it becomes easier, right? Like I'm tired. I want to, going to run. I'm going to climb this mountain. I'm tired. I need to take a break. And it's okay to take a break, right? And we can focus on those practices and priorities. That's the other really empowering thing. You can circle back to your values, your priority as a family. And when you feel overwhelmed, when there's too much, and sometimes that happened, right? As educators, I know that has happened when we were first in hybrid learning. I saw a lot of like, oh my gosh, I have to prove that I'm teaching. So I'm going to assign 3,000 different assignments. That's an exaggeration, right? And so it just felt so overwhelming, the volume of process-oriented tasks. Focus on the priorities, right? That those practices that support your development, and maybe make a schedule. I'm going to spend 2 hours in, prioritize. I'm going to spend 2 hours in play today, building Legos, or not at the high school level, working on my car, playing or creating music, drawing, painting, whatever it might be. And then I'm going to spend, these classes. I know I have this astronomy class that is really going to be important. And so I'm going to prioritize the biggest assignment for these classes. And so sometimes also, students, especially with executive function challenges, and you can help in the organization, the prioritization, that can also greatly reduce stress. And I think that in COVID that it's easy to forget, and especially important where there might be perceived increase workload demands, and just in terms of volume of assignments.
Yeah, definitely. And Sherry writes, any advice for helping gifted students become more comfortable with self-advocacy as well as more comfortable with risk-taking or failure to experiment?
I'm looking at, I think it was Okay, I see it right there. So self-advocacy skills, the emotional literacy piece really helps with self-advocacy because oftentimes that first part of it is being able to recognize how you're feeling. And it sounds so simple, but it's actually a lot of times harder than one thinks. So if we can recognize the emotions and the feelings and the impact different circumstances, behaviors, or practices are having on it, that makes it easier to self-advocate. Role playing oftentimes can be a great support and assistance, right? If we are acting out or modeling that, talking about times we had to navigate maybe an uncomfortable conversation at work, and how we did that is also helping. Can also help in growing self-advocacy skills. Was that the whole question, Becca? And certainly, Sherry, we can I'm happy to set up a time for a conversation to go into greater depth to learn about the specific situations with your students. And you're talking about risk taking and failure to experiment. Another thing that we've done in our house, we've had like a mistake wall. And so we make kind of like a game or playfulness out of celebrating our big mistakes. So maybe we're talking about them like at a regular time. We're making a ritual of like every Saturday night or Sunday night, family night, pizza dinner. We're having a game night and we're talking about our biggest mistakes of the week. And maybe we're putting it on a bulletin board. And so as we're modeling it, it makes it easier for students to take risks. And also when kind of bigger decisions, challenges present, I'll go back to Indigenous education practices. They'll guide us to look for the portals or look for the guideposts, look for the choices that align with the values of hope and courage, right? And then use those to guide your decision making and talk about those times that we talk about courageous behavior and how it felt to make big decisions that felt uncomfortable.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I'm glad that there is a DC, Douglas County Equity Task Force for Students of Color.
All right. Oh, I haven't gotten that far yet.
Oh, I jumped ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. But before we get to that one, we'll get to that one. Kim writes, how do you recommend parents, quote unquote, stay strong? These kids can be emotionally and mentally exhausting.
Parents stay strong, right? It's that self and community care. We practice we say this self-care all the time for parents, and the community, we have to do a better job of taking care of parents too. And so it's making sure that you have time to, have time in nature, whether it's like gardening, going for a hike, going for a walk. What is your creative practice? How are you replenishing yourself? What are those practices, right? And so making sure you have those practices, and also who is your support team? You're right, like honoring it. Like I love like the tongues out, right? How do you say stay mentally and emotionally strong is silliness, also playfulness. It is a way to honor the emotions of it, and also you're talking about challenge. That challenge for us ultimately builds our self-efficacy, our confidence as parents too. But yeah, parenting is just layers of beautiful mess. And at the end, when we reflect on it, it's a beautiful piece of art, right?
Definitely. Sometimes I also have a secret stash of chocolate,
Right. But then talking about that, like, what's our reward? Like, right. As adults,
Right.
we do that. When you have to do something hard, then what's the reward for it? Like, I'm going to take a bath with that bath bomb at the end of the day. I'm going to go and have that great piece of chocolate that I love. I'm going to treat myself to my favorite Thai dinner. I'm going to, talk about that. I think, we do set that up, and it's part of how we, it's part of the hope cycle, right? It's that
Right.
hope and courage. Like the hope is seeing seeing the other side of the struggle. And sometimes we can create that vision ourselves, and it doesn't have to be, a thing, right? Like it can be like, oh my gosh, I'm going to take time. And even though there's work, I'm going to forgive myself that this work, there's more work needs to be done. And I'm going to go and take a walk with my friend, Becca, and we're going to go up the mountain and see what we see.
Wonderful. All right. So our next question is, do we have a voice on the DC Equity Task Force for Gifted Students of Color? So, Mary Margaret, I just want to confirm that you are talking about the Equity Advocacy Group. And if you are, I am a member of that advocacy group. And I am a person of color, so we do have representation. If you want to reach out to me specifically about anything that you'd like to discuss, please do feel free to reach out to me. You can email me at Becca, BECCA, at dcagt.org, and we can talk if there are any specific things that you'd like to talk about. But I am on that Equity Council.
And Mary Margaret, Becca's also a member. I'm pretty sure Becca and Natasha are also members of a group called Colorado Gifted Leaders of Colors and Allies. It's a group I'm a member of too. And they recently launched super strong group. I think we're working to get their 501c3 as well. But that is a pretty powerful group, and I'd encourage you to explore that too.
Yeah, and if you reach out to me, I can get you connected with that group as well. Thank you. So Mary Margaret also writes regarding EF challenges, so executive functioning challenges. Do you have any great resources for perfectionistic GT teens who feel like imposters?
Right, and so there's a number. That's a whole presentation. Right? So we know that oftentimes, in cognitive pruning, it happens between the ages of 9 and 12 in neurotypical students. And so executive function skills often kick in then at age 13. And then for gifted youth, for students with IQs with 121 or north, oftentimes there's a delayed developmental time period. And so pruning doesn't happen oftentimes till more like ages 13 to 19. And that's a huge difference. For some students, it doesn't happen until after high school. And if you think about grades have become increasingly reflective of executive function skill development. It becomes actually very hard. Some of our gifted students whose executive function skills are delayed, we can coach till we're blue in the face. And yes, there are lots of resources, but for some students, it just happens later. And some scholars believe that there are actually cognitive benefits to that extended developmental time period, but it can be really hard, especially in high school and especially in programs that are executive function skill demanding. And so that's the piece. And the other piece you talked about, perfectionism. I mean, there's all kinds of strategies to support with perfectionism. My favorite one, just kind of as a go-to, is to set time and effort level expectations, right? Especially for non-preferred tasks. This is a non-preferred task. I'm going to work on this assignment for 20 minutes and I'm going to give it a level, I don't know, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being my hardest effort ever, I'm going to give it a level 6 or a level 7. I can do a level 6 or 7 effort for 20 minutes. And that's one way that I can talk myself through it. And it's just the practice. This is focusing on the practice versus the outcome. This is how long I'm going to try in my effort level. And this is doable for me. Because it's oftentimes, I think there's an expectation that for some gifted students in some communities that they're giving a level 10 effort all of the time, and that's not sustainable. That, if you're doing brain surgery, yes, please give a level 10 effort. But the reality is I can't give level 10 all the time. I'm a human and I need to rest and replenish. I need to, I need to eat occasionally and sleep, right? And so helping create visuals around that oftentimes can be very helpful for taking healthy risks and having high expectations and encouraging growth, but not avoiding some of the pitfalls of perfectionism and perfectionistic behaviors. Yep, Dan Peters is an excellent resource on perfectionism. Dr. Thomas Greenspan also has a book, Moving Beyond Perfect. It's another good resource too. Lisa Van Gever has the Gifted Guru website. Perfectionism is her thing. She has a book on it as well, and a ton of free resources on her website too.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much for all of that information. It looks like that was our last question. Oh, nope, we have another question. Let's see. So this is a question from the email. It says, my daughter's a sixth grader, so she's new to middle school this year. She's always loved school until this year. She's hating middle school. I'd love to learn more about accommodations that might be available to better support her emotional needs.
Yeah. So that is a whole piece. Like, I will do a free 30-minute consultation. Send me an email and we'll set up a time, because I don't want to ask you to reveal private information about your child here in this public format, especially knowing it's being recorded. But we can really look at that in greater depth, and I'm happy to spend that time with you to really get to know your child and provide some recommendations based on their specific school context, because I want your, did you say your daughter?
Yeah, it was a daughter.
I want your daughter to find that joy and love of learning, and feel connected to school community.
Wonderful. And I will make sure to email this person so that she has your contact information.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right. I see that we are past our time. So in order to honor everyone's time, I'd like so much to thank you, Kate, for joining us today, for providing us with all this wonderful information, with all the engagement that we've received. I know that people found it very helpful, very informative, and I did as well. So thank you very much.
And thank you likewise. I mean, advocacy work has such a tremendous impact in the lives of children. So thank you for all that Douglas County Gifted and Talented does to support the community.
Thank you. And so thank you all for joining us this evening. Thank you for your questions and your willingness to share with us about your parenting and what's worked for you, and about your children. We are also going to be having our next DCAG Live on Tuesday, March the 30th, and we're going to be discussing twice exceptionality, and it's going to be presented by the DCSD Advanced Academics and Gifted Education Department. So in the chat, I've put a link to a survey. If you could fill out that short survey to help us improve our future sessions, I'd really appreciate it. And Sherry, I see that there was one more comment, and I will make sure to get that question answered for you. And I will contact you with that information through Facebook. So thank you very much to everyone, and we will hopefully see you next time. Thanks. Bye.